So ayan, hindi na natin patatagalin pa at muli na tayong mag-aaral ng panibagong paksa sa philosophy. Ito ay ang reading 7a hanggang 7b. Ang paksa ay ang Anselm's Ontological Argument hanggang sa matalakay natin ang Proslogium at ang 5 Ways to Prove God's Existence ni Aquinas. Muli, ako si Marius Arosa, ang isa sa mga reporters at itutuloy na ito ni Gia Alvario.
Okay, so bago tayo mag-proceed sa ontological argument and sa proslogium, i-introduce ko muna kayo sa nagsulat nito. Si Saint Anselm of Canterbury. Siya ang Archbishop of Canterbury. Naniniwala siyang mahalaga ang reason para ma-validate ang faith ng isang tao. He is often considered to be the father of scholastic philosophy dahil ina-emphasize ng mga works niya ang linguistic at analytical thinking. Sa kanya rin nag-originate ang ontological argument na pag-uusapan natin ngayon. Ontological argument. Sinasabi niya sa argument niya na God is a being than which no greater can be conceived. Like kahit anong isipin mong bagay na magaling o maganda, may masihigit pa doon and si God yun because God is the greatest. Sinasabi ni Anselm na hindi siya pwedeng hindi mag-exist kasi ang perfection, ayon sa kanya, ay nag-i-imply ng existence. According to Anselm, there are two ways in which something can exist. First, yung isang bagay ay nag-e-exist lang sa isip natin. Let's say, for example, yung imaginary boyfriend natin na gwapo, chinito, matalino, umiigting ang panga and walang red flags. Yung isa naman, nag-e-exist sa isip natin and nag-e-exist din sa realidad, which is kagaya ng cellphones. Naiisip natin siya and nag-e-exist din kasi nahahawakan natin mga cellphones natin. Pinoint out ni Anselm na mas maganda kung mag-e-exist ang isang bagay sa reality na parang sa isip natin. Like yung imaginary boyfriend. Diba mas maganda kung mag-e-exist siya in reality? So dito na papasok yung sinasabi ni Saint Anselm na God, being defined as most great or perfect, must exist, since a God who exists is greater than a God who does not. Ibig sabihin nun, since God is the greatest thing that can be conceived by our minds, the only thing that can be greater than Him would be a God that exists in reality. Sabi niya rin na gumagana lamang ang argument na to sa necessary being, which is God. Now, let us proceed to the discussion of the Proslogium where the ontological argument is found. Chapters 1 to 13 will be discussed by Marius.
So yon, maraming salamat Gia. Maaari na tayong tumuloy sa ating main topic which is ang Proslogium ni Anselm. So in this part, I'll be explaining every chapter kung ano ba ang nilalaman nun as briefly as possible since mahaba talaga siya guys. So sa chapter 1, pinaliwanag dito ang arousal of the mind for contemplating God. So hinanda ni Anselm nang lubusan ng kanyang isipan as he was calling to God on divine help so that people may think rightly about Him whose existence is setting out to prove. Nagsama siya ng mga ilang Bible verses tulad nung nilapit ng mga tao ang kanilang mga aspirations kay God, kung anong landas ba ang kanilang tatahakin, kung nilapit nila ang kanilang mga hinaing, at kung mapapatawad ba sila sa kanilang mga kasalanan. So sa chapter 2 naman, sinabi dito na God truly exists. By defining God as something than which nothing greater can be conceived, God then exists in understanding, and we comprehend this concept. But if God only exists in understanding, then something greater can be conceived, as a being which exists in reality greater than an imaginary one. So picture this out guys. Ang isang kabayo at ang unicorn. So 'di ba, mas madali nating maiisip ang isang kabayo since we can see it in reality compared sa unicorn na sinasabing similar siya sa kabayo pero meron siyang horn. So mahirap pa yan kasi maaaring magkakaiba tayo ng ating mga imagination at iba pa lang naisip natin kung anong itsura ng unicorn kasi hindi pa nga natin siya nakikita in reality. So that's the statement is impossible. So God must exist in reality. Bakit kaya? Magkakonekta ito sa next chapter. Still, it is possible to conceive of something greater than that which nothing greater can be conceived. So sa chapter 3, ayan, ang kakonekta niya, pinaliwanag dito na God cannot be thought not to exist. Hindi pwedeng isipin na hindi existing si God. By definition, God is a being than which none greater can be imagined. A being that necessarily exists in reality is greater than a being that does not necessarily exist. Tulad nung kabaya at unicorn kanina, yung pinag-compare natin sila. Thus, by definition, if God exists as an idea in the mind, but does not necessarily exist in reality, then we can imagine something that is greater than God. But we cannot imagine something that is greater than God. Kasi kung may naisip man tayong greater than God, sabihin na pinalitan na natin siya as the one and only creator. Diba? Thus, if God exists in the mind as an idea, then God necessarily exists in reality. So sa chapter 4, pinaliwanag dito, it talks about how the fool said in his heart what cannot be thought. The fool said that there is no God in his heart. Diba? Parang hindi siya naniniwala sa Diyos. But whenever we spoke of to say in the heart, it means to think. Kumbaga, diba ang nanggaling sa puso? Sabihin yun, totoo. Na pinag-isipan din natin ito. So therefore, God exists in the understanding and reality. Sa chapters 5 to 7, sinabi dito na God is whatever it is, better than to be not to be. Alone existing through himself, he makes all other things from nothing. So as he is the highest of all things, what good is lacking from him if he is the supreme good? Ano nga ba ang pagkukulang niyan, 'di ba? Kung nasa kanya na ang lahat. So he is better that he knows justice, 'di ba? Mas okay ng may justice siya kaysa wala, 'di ba? And mas okay na he is good than not. So sa chapter 6 naman, pinaliwanag how God is able to perceive even though he is not something corporeal. By corporeal means having a physical body, di ba? Parang it is something that is tangible or nahahawakan. He may not have the senses as humans used to perceive, but he can perceive things in a sense that he knows it all as a supreme being, di ba? Bale, nakikita niya ang mga bagay or alam niya ito dahil siya nga ang supreme being. So sa chapter 7 naman, pinaliwanag how he is omnipotent even though he cannot do many things. Being omnipotent means having unlimited power to do anything. So he is not powerful. Sinabi ni Anselm dito, he is not powerful through powerlessness, but there is no one powerful than him. So sa chapters 8 to 10 naman, pinaliwanag sa chapter 8, how he is merciful and impassible. He is merciful for those wretched creatures who want to change and be spared from sin. But he is also not merciful to show compassion for wretchedness itself. Diba? Naawa siya sa mga gusto ring magbago. Pero since he is just, pinaparusahan niya pa rin ang mga taong nagkakasala. So sa chapter 9, who is completely and supremely just, spares those who are evil. He is just merciful to them. So in this chapter, it shows that God is merciful, but it also reveals that he is just and will one day dispense justice on the sin of the world. There is no setting aside of justice to make room for mercy. That's chapter 10. Pinaliwanag how he justly punishes and justly spares those who are evil. His punishment is according to the weight of the action, but also he decides if you will be spared, because his decisions befit him as the supreme good. At sa chapters 11 to 13, pinaliwanag how all the ways of the Lord are mercy and truth, and yet the Lord is just in all his ways. He is always right and just in whatever he does. The very justness of God illuminates his love, grace, and mercy in a way that nothing else could, because not only God is just, but he is our justifier, meaning he alone has the power and ability to make us righteous before him. Diba? So next sa chapter 12, pinaliwanag that God is the life by which he lives, and similarly or similar attributes means that God is only him and no other than himself. Diba? Walang makakapalit sa kanya. He is the very meaning of life. And this chapter 12 naman, how he alone pinaliwanag, how he alone is unlimited and eternal, although other spirits are also unlimited and eternal. No place and time restricts him because he has no beginning and end. Diba madalas natin itong naririnig, wala siyang pinagmulan. Diba? And he also exists everywhere. He alone is uniquely unlimited and eternal, even if other spirits are also unlimited and eternal. Yun ang sinabi ni Anselm. At dahil dyan, sunod natin ang next chapters na ipapaliwanag ni Gia.
Hello, this is Gia and I will explain chapters 14 to 26. But first, let us start with chapters 14 to 17. Saint Anselm discovered that God is the highest of all things, than which nothing better can be thought. But he wonders why his soul cannot experience God, even though his soul had found God. He said that his soul has seen God at some extent, but did not see him for who he is because of his dazzling light. He explained that a person can see or understand God's truth to some extent, but they cannot have a direct vision of God as he is because of his immense dazzling light, which means that the human mind and soul cannot comprehend God's brilliance. That has led him to believe that God is greater than can be thought of. Anselm also explained the effect of a man's sins in understanding God. He stated that he cannot see God's beauty, harmony, fragrance, softness, and succulence because the senses of his soul is impaired by sins. Next, chapters 18 to 22. Anselm said that God is life, God is wisdom, God is blessedness, and God is eternity. However, he wonders if all these things are a part of God, or is each of them the whole of what God is? Then Anselm said that God is not composed of these things. Instead, each of these things are a whole of what God is, because God is oneness, or God is unity itself. Anselm applied the same concept in God's eternity, that his eternity is not divided in any distinction of time, such as yesterday, today, and tomorrow, because God exists beyond all time. He is there before all things, and he is beyond all things. But Anselm also asked if God's eternity is beyond eternal things as well. Anselm explained that their eternity is not the same as God's eternity because, as I've said, God is beyond all time. It led Anselm to an understanding that God alone is what and who he is, because God has neither a past nor a future, but only a present, and because he cannot be thought ever not to exist. Lastly, chapters 23 to 26. In chapter 23, Anselm focused on the Trinity. The Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit is a whole, and they are equally the supreme good. The Son is true in the same way that the Father is true, and the Spirit is true in the same way that they are. In the next chapters, Anselm reflected on himself about how good God is. Because there are a lot of good things he mentioned, such as salvation, creating life, and wisdom. If there are these good things, then how good must be the Creator, which is God? He also stated that a person who loves God with all his heart and soul shall be granted with something that they desire. In conclusion, at the end of Anselm's prayer, he stated that even though he did not experience or understand the greatness of God in this life, he is looking forward to understand God's greatness when he enters the joy of his Lord. That's the end for the Proslogium. I'm going to hand the mic to Miss Karen Ladringan to explain the 5 ways of Saint Aquinas. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gia and Mario, sa pagdidiscuss niyo sa first part ng ating discussion. So, pumunta na tayo sa ating second reading. So, it's time to say hi to the 5 Ways of God's Existence by Thomas Aquinas. So, diniscuss niya ito sa kanyang book na Summa Theologica na 2,500 pages. Pero, yung pag-uusapan lang talaga natin ngayon ay slightly more than 1 page lang siya. Pero ito yung pinaka-pinag-usapan talaga. Tapos, alam nyo ba na sa kanya ipinangalan ang UST? Kaya pala University of Santo Tomas. Tapos, FYI, nabasa ko, he warns against attempts to prove that God is triune. Kasi baka pagtawanan lang daw ng mga non-believers. So, narito ang 5 ways. Ang unang 4 ay tinatawag na cosmological arguments. Ang argument for motion, causation, necessary and contingency, tsaka gradation. Ang last naman ay ang theological argument na argument on governance. Let's discuss them one by one. So, sa argument of motion, if there are things in motion, there is a mover. Everything that is moved must be moved by another and not itself. There cannot be an infinite regress of causes. Therefore, there must be a first mover which is not being moved by anything and which other movers ultimately depend on. Tingnan ninyo itong picture. Diba, nauna yung pag-alarm, tapos napunta sa parang wheel, tapos nahulog yung baso, napunta yung mga balls sa ilalim, tapos magugupit na yung sapatos. Naka-arrive tayo dun sa last, yung I, dahil dun sa A. So, may order ng motions, kaya nangyari yung pinakahuling event. Dito naman sa causation, medyo parehas siya nitong motion, kaya ako nga pinagsama sila sa isang slide. So, i-define muna natin what is efficient cause. Ang efficient cause brings something into existence by its physical action, while effect is what is brought into existence. Nothing causes itself, so if something begins to exist, there is an efficient cause. Kailangan merong efficient cause na yun yung dahilan kung bakit nandun yung effect. Kasi there cannot be an infinite regress of causes. Therefore, there must be a first cause. Kunwari, dito sa mga domino, di ba pag domino effect, parang nakakonect-connect mo yung mga nangyayari, kaya ganito na yung nangyari ngayon. So, meron first cause talaga, kaya kunwari, nanonood na nitong Philo1 video na ito kasi naka-enroll ka sa Philo1 sa UPDEPPO, diba? Pero bago yun, nag-apply ka muna ng UPCA, diba? Tapos, baka before nun, may dahilan pa kung bakit ka nag-apply ng UPCA. Pero, meron talagang first cause yun. Hindi ko na alam kasi iba-iba na tayo ng cause nun. Pero, may pinanggalingan tayong first cause. So, in connection sa ating unang dalawang diniscuss, meron tayong short icebreaker dito. So, bibigyan ko kayo ng 5 seconds dahil 5 wheels ito para pag-isipan yung sagot. So, There are 5 gears connected in a row. The first one is connected to the second one, and the second one is connected to the third one, and so on. If the first gear is rotating clockwise, what direction is the fifth gear turning? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. At ang tamang sagot ay clockwise. Kasi, di ba, kapag clockwise yung una, yung second ay magmo-move ng counterclockwise, yung third ay magmo-move ng clockwise, ang fourth ay magmo-move ng counterclockwise, at yung last, clockwise siya. So, nakadepende sila, di ba, sa unang gumalaw. So, kung counterclockwise yung unang gumalaw, yung fifth, magiging counterclockwise din. Ayun. So, balik na tayo sa third argument. Ang possibility and necessity. Possible beings can be created and corrupted. Pwede silang mag-exist or not exist. Katulad ng tayong mga tao. Tingnan nyo yung picture, di ba, pinanganak tayo, we are created, pero pwede rin tayong mamatay or pwede rin tayong mawala. Kahit hindi tayo mag-exist dito sa mundo, patuloy pa rin yung mundo. Hindi naman sa pang-ano, pero ganun tayong mga tao. Tapos, if some beings exist, then not all beings are possible beings. Because, kung lahat tayo possible beings lang, there must have been a time that we or they had not existed. So, walang kahit ano, di ba? Which means nothing ever existed. Pero merong mga nag-exist ngayon. Kaya, therefore, there must be at least one thing, that one being that is impossible not to exist, a necessary being. Dito naman sa fourth argument, which is gradation, there are things which we can classify as more or less perfect. To have degrees of perfection, there must be some perfect being to compare to. Example dito yung grades natin, di ba? Kunwari, 1 yung pinakamataas. Alam natin siya na yung pinakamataas kasi wala nang tataas pa doon, wala namang 0.75 na grade, di ba? Pero pag 2, alam natin meron pa sa taas niya na 1, 1.25, tsaka 1.50, tsaka 1.75, di ba? So, dapat meron tayong perfect being na kinocomparean para natin masabi na more or less perfect ang isang bagay o isang being. Para naman sa last na argument, itong governance. Every agent acts for an end or purpose. Things which cannot act on their own are determined by something else. Therefore, if the world is governed by laws such as law of motion, they are not due to chance, but because there is a supreme intelligence that ordained them. Example nito yung mga bees, di ba? Nakakagawa sila ng honey, and yung mga butterflies, nakapag-transfer sila ng mga pollen, kaya dumarami yung mga flowers, di ba? Ang sinasabi ni Aquinas na merong supreme being na nagdadirect sa kanila, kaya nila nagagawa yung mga nagagawa nila. So, para matandaan natin, dahil ito yung parang summarization lang ng mga nung diniscuss. So, pag motion, ang tinutukoy ni Aquinas ay first mover, sa causation ay first cause, sa necessary and contingency ay necessary being, sa gradation, perfect being, at sa governance, supreme intelligence. So, ang lahat ng ito, tinutukoy niya na God. Pero wala siyang sinabi kung isa lang ba, kung committee, or kung anong characteristic niya, mapagmahal ba, ganon. Kaya maraming mga oppositions na dito sa 5 ways. Pero, pwede naman kasi natin tanggapin yung kanyang conclusion nang hindi tinatanggap yung iba niyang arguments. Pwede yun. Kaya, ayun, narito na nagtatapos. Sana marami kayong natutunan. Thank you!